The hillside faced north. That was the first thing anyone noticed about it, and the last thing anyone needed to say. In the Vestfjord, where the winter sun barely cleared the mountains for 3 months of the year, a north-facing hillside was as close to worthless as land could be without being underwater. No sun meant no warmth. No warmth meant no grass. No grass meant no livestock. No livestock meant no life. Chieftain Sigurd Blackhand gave it to his freed thrall, Torsten, on a Tuesday in late August, with the particular generosity of a man giving away something he could not sell. 40 acres, Sigurd said, tossing the land deed onto the table of his great hall as if it were a fishbone. North slope above the creek, it is yours, as promised, your freedom and your land. Our debt is settled. Torsten picked up the deed and looked at it. He was 26 years old, lean and hard from 12 years of servitude, his hands scarred from work that had started when he was 14 and captured in a raid on the Finnish coast. His face showed nothing, because a thrall who showed his feelings was a thrall who invited punishment. The North Slope, he said, as I said. The North Slope where the ground freezes in October and does not thaw until May. Sigurd's smile was pleasant and empty. Land is land, Torsten. What you make of it is your concern. You wanted your freedom. You wanted land. You have both. If the land is not to your liking, you are free to walk away from it. Walk away with nothing. Walk away into a winter that was 8 weeks from arriving, with no shelter, no stores, no tools except the axe and the knife that Sigurd had given him as part of the freedom agreement. Walk away and prove what everyone in the Vestfjord already believed, that a freed thrall was just a dead man who had not yet realized it. I will keep the land, Torsten said. I thought you might. Sigurd turned back to his fire, dismissing the former slave from his attention the way he dismissed everything that was no longer useful to him. Good luck with the winter. The men in the hall laughed. Not all of them, but enough. The sound followed Torsten out through the door and into the August sunlight, where it mixed with the wind off the fjord and blew away to nothing. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from today, whether your winters are dark or your summers are short. These stories of building from nothing apply to everyone. Subscribe now, because what Torsten built on that frozen hillside will change everything you think about what one person can do with bad land and good knowledge. Torsten had been born in Finland, in a village on the Gulf of Bothnia, where the winters were longer and colder than anything the Norwegians had ever experienced. His father, Väinö, had been a builder, not of boats or barns, but of the earth lodges that the Finnish people had constructed for centuries. Half-underground shelters, sunk into the earth, insulated by the ground itself, heated not by great roaring fires, but by the steady warmth of the planet beneath their feet. Väinö had taught his son the principles before the raiders came. Before the longships appeared at dawn and the village burned, and a 14-year-old boy was dragged onto a ship in chains. The knowledge had lived inside Torsten for 12 years, unused, unspoken, waiting for the moment when it would matter. That moment was now. The north-facing hillside that Sigurd Blackhand had given him was by every conventional measure the worst piece of land in the Vestfjord. It received no direct sunlight from November through February. The ground froze hard as iron by mid-October. The wind off the fjord hit the slope with nothing to break it, a constant scouring presence that stripped heat from anything that stood in its path. No one could build a conventional longhouse on that slope and survive the winter. The timber walls would leak heat faster than any fire could replace it. The wind would find every crack and seam. The frozen ground would turn the floor into a sheet of ice. Sigurd knew this. Every man in his hall knew this. The land was a death sentence disguised as a gift. But Thorsten's father had not built conventional houses. He had built into the earth, where the temperature was constant, where the wind could not reach, where the frozen surface was just a shell over ground that was warm and stable and alive. Thorsten walked his 40 acres on the first day, studying the slope the way his father had studied the land near their village. He was looking for 3 things: a place where the hill was steep enough to dig into horizontally, a place where the soil was deep enough to provide insulation above the chamber, and a place where the drainage was natural, where water would flow away from the structure instead of pooling inside it. He found it on the east side of the slope, where the hill curved and created a sheltered pocket invisible from the settlement below. The ground here was a thick layer of clay over a bed of glacial gravel, exactly the combination his father had preferred. The clay would hold its shape when carved. The gravel would drain water, and the hill above provided 15 feet of earth overhead, more than enough to insulate against any cold the surface could produce. He began digging on September 1st. He had 4 tools: the axe, the knife, a shovel he traded for by working 2 days at a neighboring farm, and his hands. He had no timber, no iron fittings, no rope, no help. He dug horizontally into the hillside, carving a tunnel 6 feet high and 4 feet wide that angled slightly downward to allow drainage. The tunnel ran 10 feet into the hill before opening into the main chamber, which he excavated over the next 3 weeks into a space 18 feet wide, 22 feet deep, and 8 feet tall. The dimensions were not arbitrary. His father had taught him the ratios. The width should be no more than twice the height to prevent the ceiling from sagging. The depth should be no more than 3 times the width to allow air to circulate from the entrance to the back wall. The ceiling should be arched, not flat, because an arch distributed the weight of the earth above evenly across the walls, while a flat ceiling concentrated the weight in the center, where it would eventually collapse. Thorsten carved the ceiling into a gentle curve, scraping the clay with the edge of his axe, smoothing it until it formed a continuous arc from wall to wall. The work was slow and precise. Each day, he removed another few inches of earth, hauling it out through the tunnel in a basket he wove from willow branches. Each evening, he checked the ceiling with his hands, feeling for cracks, for soft spots, for any sign that the earth above was shifting. By October 1st, the main chamber was complete. The walls were smooth and solid, the ceiling a perfect arch, the floor level and firm on the gravel base. The temperature inside was 52 degrees. Outside, the first frost had already come and gone, and the morning ice on the creek was thickening daily. Now came the part that made his father's technique different from anything the Norwegians had ever seen, the part that made fire unnecessary. Thorsten's father had called it the kuas, the Finnish word for the stone mass that was the heart of every earth lodge. It was not a fireplace. It was not a stove. It was a structure of stones stacked in a specific pattern that absorbed heat from a single intense fire and released it slowly over days. The principle was simple. Dense stone absorbed heat far more efficiently than air. A fire burning in open air heated the air around it, which rose to the ceiling and escaped through any opening. But a fire burning inside a mass of stacked stones heated the stones themselves, which held the heat for hours or days after the fire died. radiating it slowly and steadily into the surrounding space. Torsten spent 2 weeks building his cuirass. He hauled stones from the creek bed, selecting only the densest, heaviest cobbles he could carry, the dark basalt and granite that weighed twice as much as sandstone and held heat 4 times as long. He stacked them in a dome-shaped pile against the back wall of the chamber, 5 feet wide, 4 feet tall, and 3 feet deep, with a cavity at the center large enough to hold a fire. The cavity was connected to the entrance tunnel by a narrow channel cut into the floor, through which air could flow to feed the fire. The smoke escaped through a second channel that rose through the stone mass and exited through a pipe that ran upward through the earth to the surface. The firing process was the critical step. Torsten built a large fire inside the stone cavity using birchwood he had gathered from the valley below. He fed the fire for 6 hours, keeping it as hot as possible, until the stones were so hot that he could feel the heat radiating from 3 feet away. The stone mass glowed with absorbed energy, the dark basalt holding the fire's heat the way a clay pot holds boiling water. Then he let the fire die. He sealed the air channel with a plug of wet clay. He sealed the smoke channel with a flat stone. And he waited. The stones radiated heat for 72 hours. 3 full days of steady, even warmth, the temperature in the chamber rising from its baseline, 52 degrees to 68 degrees, and holding there for 2 days before slowly declining back to 60, then 55, then 52. 3 days of warmth from 6 hours of fire, and the fire itself had consumed only half a cord of wood. Torsten calculated the numbers. A conventional longhouse burned 25 cords of wood per winter, feeding fires that ran day and night for 5 months. His earth lodge with the cuirass would require a firing every 3 days, each firing consuming half a cord. Over a 5-month winter, that was 25 firings, consuming 12.5 cords total, half the wood. And most of that heat would stay inside the chamber instead of leaking through timber walls and into the wind. But he could reduce it further. His father had taught him that body heat mattered, that a sleeping person generated as much warmth as a small oil lamp, that 2 people in an insulated space could raise the temperature by 5 degrees just by existing. Torsten did not have another person, but he had the wild goats that roamed the hillside, and in October he captured 3 of them, building a pen in the rear section of the chamber separated from the living space by a low wall of packed earth. 3 goats in an enclosed space generated warmth equivalent to a small fire burning constantly. Combined with the QS, combined with the Earth's baseline 52 degrees, the chamber maintained a temperature between 58 and 65 degrees throughout October without a single additional firing. He fired the Kiowas once in November, once in December, and twice in January when the temperature outside dropped to 35 below. Each firing lasted 6 hours and consumed half a cord of birch. The rest of the time, the stones and the goats and the earth did the work. He had built a hall that stayed warm without a single fire burning. The smoke from the firings was the only evidence that anyone lived on the frozen hillside. It appeared once every 3 days, a brief plume of gray that rose from a pipe disguised as a broken stump, lasted 6 hours, and then vanished. Between firings there was nothing. No smoke, no light, no sound. Just a hillside that everyone believed was empty. Sigurd Blackhand's men rode past the slope in November and saw nothing. They rode past in December and saw nothing. They rode past in January when every other homestead in the Vestfjord was burning through its wood stores at desperate rates and the smoke from the Longhouses was constant and thick, and they saw nothing on Torsten's hillside except snow and frozen grass and silence. "The Finn is dead," Sigurd told his hall. "Froze on that hillside in October, most likely. The wolves have had him by now. I will claim the land in spring." But Torsten was not dead. He was underground, 8 feet below the frozen surface, sitting beside a cuirass that radiated heat from a firing 3 days ago, eating smoked fish and barley bread while his goats chewed their hay and breathed warmth into the chamber. Stay with me, because what Torsten's father taught him, the technique that had kept Finnish families warm for centuries, is the reason Torsten had a hall at 60 degrees when every longhouse in the Vestfjord was burning its last timber, and the temperature outside had not risen above 20 below in 3 weeks. Sigurd Blackhand came himself in late January, not to check on Torsten, whom he believed to be dead, but to survey the land he planned to reclaim in spring. He rode up the slope with 2 men, following the path that wound around the east side of the hill to the pocket where the ground was sheltered from the worst of the wind. He was halfway across what he did not know was Torsten's roof when he smelled it. Bread. The unmistakable smell of barley bread baking in a warm space. The smell rising from the frozen ground beneath his horse's hooves like a memory of summer. He dismounted. He walked in circles, his boots crunching on the frozen surface, his nose following the scent. His men watched him with growing unease. "There is bread baking underground," Sigurd said. The words sounded insane even to him. "Perhaps a fox den," one of his men offered without conviction. "Foxes do not bake bread." They found the entrance tunnel 20 minutes later, hidden behind a screen of dead brush that Torsten had arranged to look natural. The tunnel mouth was a dark opening in the hillside, barely visible against the frozen earth, with a fitted wooden door set back 4 feet from the entrance. Sigurd pulled the door open. Warm air rushed out, carrying the scent of bread and the sweet, grassy smell of goats and dried hay. He ducked into the tunnel and walked 10 feet into the hill, the temperature rising with every step, the frozen world disappearing behind him as if it belonged to a different season. He emerged into the chamber and stopped. Torsten was standing at a flat stone that served as his table, cutting a loaf of barley bread that had been baked on the heated surface of the cuirass. The stone mass behind him radiated warmth like a living thing, the basalt cobbles still hot from a firing 2 days prior. The 3 goats lay in their pen, chewing contentedly, their body heat a constant presence in the warm, dry air. The chamber was clean, organized, and comfortable. Dried fish and smoked meat hung from pegs driven into the earthen walls. Sacks of barley stood against the back wall. A bed of sheepskins and dried grass occupied one corner, thick and warm and elevated above the floor on a platform of packed earth. The walls were smooth, the ceiling a graceful arch, the floor solid gravel. There was no ice, there was no moisture, there was no cold, and there was no fire. "Where is your fire?" Sigurd asked. It was the first thing he said, the only thing his mind could focus on, because everything he understood about winter survival began and ended with fire. "There is no fire," Torsten said. He set down the bread and faced the chieftain who had given him a death sentence disguised as freedom. "There has been no fire in this chamber for 2 days. "That is impossible. It is 30 below outside. It is 62 degrees in here." Sigurd looked at the cuirass, at the stones that still radiated warmth from a fire that had been dead for 48 hours. He put his hand on the surface. The stone was warm, not hot, but warm, the kind of steady, gentle warmth that a sleeping animal produces, the kind that comes from deep inside something dense and patient. What is this? My father called it a cuis, a mass of stone that absorbs heat from a fire and releases it over days. One firing every 3 days, 6 hours of burning, half a cord of wood. Then the stones do the work. Half a cord every 3 days. Sigurd's voice was flat, calculating. That is less than we burn in a single hour in my great hall. Your great hall is made of wood and sits on top of the frozen ground. My hall is made of earth and sits inside it. The earth starts at 52 degrees. The stones add 10. The goats add 5. You start at 0 and try to reach 60 by burning half the forest. I start at 52 and reach 67 by burning almost nothing. Sigurd walked the length of the chamber. He touched the walls. He felt the ceiling. He counted the stores of food. He looked at the goats. He looked at the bed. He looked at the man who had been his thrall for 12 years and who had, in 4 months of solitary labor, built something that made his great hall look like a child's construction of sticks and mud. You learned this in Finland? My father taught me before I was taken. The Earth Lodge is how Finnish people have lived for centuries. It is how we survived winters that would kill your bravest warriors in a week. Why did you never speak of this? In 12 years of service, you never once mentioned that you knew how to build a shelter that needed no fire. Torsten's expression did not change. You did not ask, chieftain. A thrall who offers opinions that are not requested is a thrall who invites the whip. I kept my knowledge the way I kept my breath, quietly, until I needed it. The silence that followed was the longest Sigurd Blackhand had ever endured. There are families here who will not survive March, he said. I can shelter 8 people in my chamber. More if we expand the goat pen. Send me the families with the least fuel. Sigurd looked at him from across the hall, the fire between them burning through logs at a rate that would exhaust the stores in 2 weeks. After what I did to you, you would take them in? My father taught me that the earth does not care about grudges. It only cares about who is prepared and who is not. Send me the families, chieftain, before it is too late. 8 people sheltered in Torsten's Earth Lodge for the last 4 weeks of winter. 2 families with young children, their longhouses too damaged and too cold to survive another storm. They descended into the hillside, expecting a hole in the ground. They found a home. The Kaiwas heated the chamber every 3 days. The goats provided warmth between firings. The earth maintained its steady 52 degrees regardless of what the surface did. The children slept warm. The parents ate. No one burned a single log during the hours between firings because the stones held the heat and the earth held the stones, and the earth never forgot what summer felt like. If Norse reckoning has become part of your week, consider joining the channel membership. Your support helps us bring you more stories of hidden preparation and quiet vindication. When spring came, Sigurd Blackhand called a gathering of the settlement. He asked Torsten to stand before the assembled families and explain what he had built. Torsten spoke plainly, the way he had always spoken, without adornment or pride or the need to make his audience comfortable. The earth is warm, he said. Always warm, 52 degrees, winter and summer. If you build inside the earth instead of on top of it, you start with that warmth. You do not have to create it. You only have to keep it. He explained the cuis. He explained the arched ceiling. He explained the entrance tunnel and the drainage and the ventilation. He explained the goats and the body heat and the numbers that made fire almost unnecessary. The people listened, some with skepticism, some with curiosity, some with the particular shame of people who had watched a freed thrall walk into winter on the worst land in the fjord and had assumed he was walking to his death. "Will you teach us?" a woman asked. She was the mother of one of the families he had sheltered. Her youngest child was on her hip, the child who would have died if the Earth Lodge had not been there. "I will teach anyone who wants to learn," Torsten said. "My father taught me. It cost him nothing to teach. It costs me nothing to teach. Knowledge that is hoarded is knowledge that dies. Knowledge that is shared is knowledge that survives." He taught them. Through the spring and summer of that year, Torsten supervised the construction of 4 Earth Lodges in the Vestfjord, each one built to the Finnish principles his father had taught him. He showed them how to read the land, how to find the right soil, how to carve the arch ceiling, how to build the cuas, how to size the entrance for proper ventilation. By the second winter, 12 families had underground shelters. Not all of them were primary homes. Some were emergency chambers, stocked and sealed, waiting for the deep cold that everyone now understood could come without warning. The wood consumption of the settlement dropped by half. The families who had built Earth Lodges burned 12 cords where they had previously burned 25. The families who still lived in Longhouses began, one by one, to dig. Torsten married in the 3rd year. Her name was Isa, a Norwegian woman from a farm 30 miles south, who had heard the story of the thrall who heated his home with stones and had come to see the cuas for herself. She was a weaver, practical and direct, and she saw in the Earth Lodge not a hole in the ground, but the most intelligent home she had ever entered. Together, they expanded the chamber into a complex of 3 rooms: the main living space, a dedicated weaving room where Isa worked by the steady warmth of the cuas, and a storage chamber dug even deeper into the hillside where food stayed cold enough to preserve, but never cold enough to freeze. They added a second cuas in the weaving room, a smaller version that Isa could fire herself, keeping her workspace at the exact temperature that made wool easiest to work. They raised 5 children in the earth. All of them grew up knowing the smell of warm stone and dry clay, knowing that the surface world with its wind and ice was something you visited but did not have to live in. All of them learned to build the cuas, to read the soil, to understand that the earth was not a thing to conquer, but a partner to work with. Chieftain Sigurd Blackhand died in the 11th year after Torsten's freedom, having never fully reckoned with what he had done and what it had produced. His son, who inherited the chieftainship, was a different kind of man, one who had grown up watching the Earth Lodges multiply and who understood that the Finnish thrall's knowledge was the most valuable thing his father had ever given away, even if his father had given it with the intention of doing harm. The phrase, "the thrall's hillside," entered the vocabulary of the Vestfjord, meaning any asset that looks worthless until someone with the right knowledge makes it invaluable. When a piece of land was dismissed, when a person was underestimated, when a technique was mocked, the old-timers would shake their heads and say, "Remember the thrall's hillside. Remember Torsten." The original Earth Lodge collapsed decades ago, the clay walls softening over time as the drainage channels silted and water found its way inside. But the Kiowa stones were recovered and used in new constructions, passed from builder to builder like an inheritance of heat. And somewhere in the Vestfjord, there are probably still stones in the walls of farmhouses that were first heated by a freed thrall in a chamber that everyone believed was his grave. Torsten Vinusson lived until the age of 61, dying in the expanded earth lodge that had grown from a desperate shelter into the warmest, most efficient dwelling in the Vestfjord. His children buried him on the hillside that Sigurd Blackhand had given him to die on, in ground that was frozen on the surface but warm underneath, the way it had always been, the way his father had taught him it would be. Above the entrance to the original chamber, carved in runes that Isa had taught him, because a Finnish thrall had never learned to write in Norse, is an inscription that visitors sometimes find when the brush is cleared away and the hillside reveals its secrets. The earth is warm, the earth is patient, the earth does not care who you were, only what you build. Some stories end with revenge. This one ends with something more lasting. A man who was given nothing and built everything. Who went underground because the surface would not have him, and who found in the earth a warmth that no longhouse and no chieftain and no amount of firewood could match. What is the shelter that everyone thinks you do not have? And where have you buried your preparation?